Welcome to our lesson on the four-part division of Israel, lesson 3. Today we'll be looking at the Rift Valley and also the Transjordan as part of our discussion of the four-part division. The Rift Valley is a huge crack in the Earth's crust. It stretches all the way even north of Israel up into Turkey, all the way down into Africa, Tanzania, and Mozambique. So it's a huge geological fault line. And in Israel, we call the Rift Valley the Jordan Valley. In the northern part of the Jordan Valley is the important city of Hatzor. And we can see that even the modern road goes right around Hatzor. The geography there determines that the easiest route goes right past this important site. Joshua was commanded by God to take all the land, and of course he had to take Hatzor. And Joshua 11:10-11 says, "Then Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hatzor, and struck its king with the sword. For Hatzor formerly was the head of all these kingdoms. They struck every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was no one left who breathed, and he burned Hatzor with fire." Well, the International Coastal Highway, that route that connects Egypt with Mesopotamia, passed right by the site of Hatzor, thus making it a very important site in Israel. And Hatzor kind of controlled the eastern approaches into Israel as well. So those coming in from Damascus had to be funneled right through this site as they entered the land of Israel. All right, from Hatzor, we'll go to the Hula Valley, and the Hula Valley really is a continuation of the Jordan Valley, north of the Sea of Galilee. And this valley originally had a lake. You can see there in our map. It kind of looks like a mini Sea of Galilee, just north of the Sea of Galilee. That lake has been drained in the 1950s. And this area has become very fertile for farming. It used to be pretty swampy. So there still is a small lake there, but nothing compared to the larger lake that used to be there. And that area is very fertile. They get many harvests a year from this area called the Hula Valley. We're now standing on the site of Hatzor, looking off to the north and northeast, and in the distance we can see Mount Hermon. And the Hula Valley receives abundant runoff from rainfall in Mount Hermon, and even the melting snow flows down into the Hula Valley. And so that area is a very well-watered place. Now, at Tel Dan, which is pretty much right at the foot of Mount Hermon in the Jordan Valley, King Jeroboam built high places for worship there at that site at Dan, and he also built one farther south at Bethel. 1 Kings 12:26-27 says, "Jeroboam said in his heart, 'Now the kingdom will return to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah.'" So this is Jeroboam's fear after the kingdom split, that people may be tempted to go back and join with Judah. So rather than be influenced when they would go to Jerusalem to worship, he set up his own worship centers, one in the north at Dan and one in the extreme south of the kingdom of Israel at Bethel. So the king consulted and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, "Is it too much for you to go up to Jerusalem? Behold your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt." He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. And so this is the site of Bethel. It also had a worship center there. So one in the north, one in the south. All right, here we are at Tel Dan in the north. It sits right in the middle of the Hula Valley, which is part of the Jordan Valley, which is part of the Rift Valley. And he built this high place there. This high place was in existence for over 1,000 years. It was rebuilt several times, but it lasted all the way up to the end of the Roman period. So the sins of Jeroboam affected not only his generation, but generations to come. Here we can see a metal framework that outlines where the original sacrificial altar would have stood at this high place at Tel Dan. And they worship gods like Baal and Asherah, false gods that were prohibited, but King Jeroboam influenced the people to worship these false gods. And they may have been duped into believing that these gods were providing them with water and rainfall and abundance, because that area of Dan receives a lot of runoff from Mount Hermon. The water even comes up in the form of springs bubbling up through the ground. So it's a very fertile area, a very well-watered area. Well, let's move south, Tel Dan, down to the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is really a lake. It's kind of too small to really be a sea. And it sits in a basin, as we'll see in a minute. Here's where the River Jordan enters into the Sea of Galilee, and as you look at that, you might say, that's a river? That doesn't look very big. And because the modern nations of Israel, Jordan, Syria all take their water before it gets into the Sea of Galilee, the flow of the Jordan River going into the sea is very much reduced today. In biblical times, it would have been much greater. In this aerial picture, we can see how the Sea of Galilee sits in the crater of an extinct volcano. So almost on all sides, there are hills that descend very rapidly down to the Sea of Galilee. From the Arbel Cliffs, you can look down on the Sea of Galilee. And the one area that really doesn't have cliffs is the area in the distance in our picture. That is the plain of Gennesaret. But most of the rest of the Sea of Galilee is surrounded by hills or cliffs. And we're also looking out from Mount Arbel, looking down on the plain of Gennesaret in this slide. Now we're looking back on the Arbel Cliffs. You can see how they kind of loom over that western side of the Sea of Galilee. As we look from the southwestern corner of the sea, looking over to the east and northeast, we see the cliffs of the Golan Heights, and they're quite evident in this picture. We can see how they tower over the Sea of Galilee. Here are the cliffs near Corsi, the site of Corsi, and the Golan Heights. And because of these cliffs, the air heats up on the sea during the day and kind of circulates, and mixes with the cool air from the sea, mixes with the warm air that's being heated up by the sun. And as a result, storms can come up pretty quickly on the Sea of Galilee, as we see in Mark chapter 4. Well, let's read that passage. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. Mark 4:35-37. Moving farther south to the Jordan Valley, between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, again, as I mentioned, has a greatly reduced flow today because so much water is taken out before it even flows into the Jordan River. So it's very windy, kind of winds back and forth. And we can see here that the river is quite weak. It kind of follows the path of least resistance, so it's quite windy today. It doesn't go in a straight line because of the flow being so weak. And you can see that in this picture, another big curve in the Jordan River. But in biblical times, sometimes it would flood and it would be over a kilometer wide, like in the days of Joshua. Let's read Joshua 3:13-14. It shall come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above will stand in one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people. Continuing, and when those who carried the Ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of harvest. The waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those which were flowing down toward the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off, so the people crossed opposite Jericho. Joshua 3:15-16. So very little water enters the Jordan from its various sources, one of that being the Yarmuk River in the country of Jordan today, flows in through the Yarmuk Canyon, but very reduced water flow coming in from the Yarmuk Canyon today.